Thank you. So, what do you see? Well, I'll show you. Isn't it fascinating to see a chair that pops out of a flat surface? It gives you the impression that I'm a magician, right? But guess what? I'm not. But it's one thing to look at a fixed object, but it becomes another thing when the object tells its own story and becomes alive. Like you, I have a curious mind that likes to be triggered. And like you, I want to know how the world around us is being shaped. This level of curiosity is something we all develop during our childhood. When everything seemed possible and there were no borders, you find your joy in playing with your wooden blocks or your Lego, and you create the most remarkable structures without any building restrictions. And even if your parents didn't have the money to buy you expensive toys, it doesn't matter because you could always find something at home to play with. For me, it were the wine bottles that were shattered around the house, which I use as chimney stacks for a steamship, like the Titanic, for instance. What I obviously didn't notice was that the wine was the new joy in the life of my parents. Another example are the shoelaces I used to make curvaceous roads in order for my small-scale Alfa Romeos to play on. But this level of joy and to create your own world disappears when you get older, because you leave it up for the designers like me to create your world. So you give up your creative power to the artist, actually. But thankfully, as a designer, I get the opportunity to bring back the joy in your mind and to trigger your curiosity again. This by showing my joy in my design process and also show you how an object can shape itself. So who knows, when you go back home, you're gonna go back and look for your old toys again. So this fascination in creating my own world started when I was a student studying architecture and interior design. I quickly noticed that I had to find my own ingredients to work with. And I saw that all the great artists like Leonardo da Vinci, and they were all were inspired by nature, actually. Because nature gives us pure logic and honesty. And beauty has its own function, actually. So, if you go outside, you will notice that we're actually not the only builders on this planet. Because for millions of years, it were the animals that improved their building behavior and their building skills. And I like to call it animal architecture. And until this day, we try to do research and analyze how they do it, and in our search of our own perfection. And this is what we come up with. Now you find this ugly or even funny, and I'm sure that there are people that look and see the beauty out of it, which arises a new question, actually, because what is beauty? Aren't we obsessed by beauty? And can nature tell us what beauty stands for? Because for us, it's a personal experience and cultural, so it's for everybody it can be perceived differently. And in the animal kingdom, there are even birds that have their own perception of beauty. Like the bowerbird, he decorates his bower in order to impress its female counterpart. This is by collecting only the color blue from human waste and also what he can find in nature, which is obviously the color of his eyes. And in this case, you could definitely say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Because can you imagine blue-colored eyed people only would decorate their houses with the color blue? That would be crazy, right? But for me, it wasn't interesting enough to create objects that were inspired by animal architecture, because I wanted the objects to talk to me and tell their own story. And it's like giving the object legs and see how it reacts on it by the way he walks on it, and also my help in creating its own behavior. So this fascination started when I was doing research on bone structure. And yes, I've seen some nice bone structure in the audience today, in the faces, but that's not what I'm referring to, because it's there for us to protect our precious organs as an inner and outer skeleton. And the nice thing is that you can also use it as a handy tool, like your hands. But the most fascinating part is that it's a combination between flexibility and rigidness, which became excellent ingredients for me to work with. So I asked myself the question, to what degree is the object you're creating capable of dictating its own design? And in order for that to happen, a balanced collaboration between me and the material was very important, because movement has never-ending possibilities. So I needed to find my border. And as I'm quoting Isaac Newton, who says, every action has an equal or opposite reaction. So if I make cuts in the material I work with, it reacts by going in a certain direction. And if I repeat this behavior, it creates a volume which is flexible and rigid at the same time. And when it reveals itself, it shows its true nature by simplicity and minimalism. And you might think that I made a lot of calculations in order to make this from happening, but actually I was working overtime with the material to make this possible. But it's very important for designers to find the joy in their design process, because eventually this will be reflected on the faces of you as an end user. So once the chair reveals itself, it shows all the different functions that are mainly can be seen on chairs, like the legs, the back seat, the armrests, and the seat itself. And they were all made possible by only making cuts in the material. So I felt comfortable in my design formula, and it was time to create new objects. However, there was one rule. So like all the different animals in the field, all the projects I was working on, the new projects, had to have their own transformation behavior. And this is part of an interior project I'm working on right now, in which natural light comes inside and it's getting filtered by transformation, so you can regulate this. And making gaps in the material, like the wood, therefore, by transformation, it reveals the four legs and the tabletop. And in this case, you can also see that by creating those gaps become like the design part of the whole structure. In this case, you could say form follows its function. And the same can be said for the two tabletops that come together, and you create a heart of a table that can be used as a fruit bowl or a map holder. And a lot of people see this as a revolutionary approach towards flat pack furniture. Well, in this case, because flat pack furniture usually shows how functional an object can be, but they skip the look department. So it usually doesn't look so appealing. But that wasn't my main goal, to create flat pack furniture. However, you could, of course, you can store it underneath your bed or against the wall. But you have to see it as a bonus, because my final conclusion will be that my main goal is to trigger your curiosity again by combining functionality, which can be found in nature, with the designer's perspective of beauty, and that brings us art. Thank you.